if I tell you my own son locked me inside a nursing home without signing a single paper? Also, his wife could move into the house I built with my bare hands. Would you believe me? Sit with me, child. Let me tell you how a mother becomes a prisoner when the people she raised learn to love money more than blood. I never imagined that the walls of my own home, the home where I stitched curtains by hand, where I baked birthday cakes even when bills were late, where I held my son's tiny fingers during his nightmares, would someday echo with the footsteps of strangers instead of my family. I was 78 when my story began to rot, though the bruises of my life had started long before that. My name is Alina Grace Whitford, born in a small brick house in Mobile, Alabama, raised on sweet tea, Sunday church bells, and a belief I held on to far too long. That family doesn't turn on family. I've learned now that belief is only true until money enters the room. Back in the spring of 2019, I lived comfortably in the 2-story white house my late husband, Richard, and I built together in '77. He laid every plank of that wooden porch himself. I painted the railings. We had nothing, but we made everything. We raised our son, Daniel, under that roof, fed him, protected him, sacrificed for him in ways he never knew and never asked about. But that's what mothers do. They give and give and give, praying that their child won't one day use those gifts as weapons. Daniel grew up smart, handsome, and so polite people used to compliment me. "You raised a good man, Ellie," they'd say. Oh, how I wish that had stayed true. Because the boy who once brought me Mother's Day flowers from the schoolyard would eventually grow into a man who dragged me, physically and emotionally, out of my own life. It started quietly, the way most betrayals do. The first time I felt something shift was the afternoon Daniel brought his wife, Lauren, to visit. She was tall, slender, with long black hair that she always tucked behind her ear when she pretended to be polite. She smelled like expensive perfume and spoke with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. I welcomed her. I welcomed them both. I cooked roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and cornbread, Daniel's favorite. I even cleaned the silverware I reserved for holidays. I was excited to have company, excited to feel needed again. But Lauren barely touched her plate. "Oh, I don't really do heavy food," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Is this butter?" Daniel laughed as if she'd said something charming. "Mom likes her butter." They exchanged a look that lasted only a second, but it was long enough for me to understand something. She didn't want my cooking, my traditions, or my presence. That night, while cleaning up, I overheard their whispers in the hallway. "Daniel, just be patient. Once everything is figured out, it'll all fall into place." "Lauren, I just don't want to wait forever. That house is perfect. You know how badly I want it." I froze with a wet plate in my hands. That house, my house. I told myself I misunderstood. I always give people the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt becomes a shadow standing directly behind me with a knife. 2 months later, Daniel began asking innocent questions. "Mom, how are you feeling lately? You sure you're okay living alone?" "I'm fine," I said. "I garden every morning. I still walk to the store." He nodded, but the worry on his face felt practiced. Lauren chimed in sweetly. "Maybe you'd be happier somewhere with more help, somewhere safe, like a community." Community, that was the word she used. Such a soft, harmless word, like calling a cage a cozy room. I laughed it off. "I don't need a community. I've lived here for over 40 years. This is my home." Lauren smiled. "For now." I didn't respond, though the shiver in my bones told me I should have. By autumn, Daniel's visits became more frequent. He'd wander through the hallway, touch the walls, ask how much the utility bills were, run his fingers along shelves as if inspecting something. The more he walked around, the more Lauren followed behind him like a real estate agent planning an open house. One day, she said it outright. "You know, when we have kids someday, they could really grow up well in this house." My voice cracked. "This is my house." She smiled without looking at me. "Of course it is." But in her eyes it was. Then December came, and everything broke. It was a bitterly cold morning. I woke up with a strange feeling gnawing at my stomach. I made oatmeal, added cinnamon the way I liked, and sat at the small kitchen table. The sunlight hit my window just right, and for a moment I felt warm. Safe. I didn't know that morning would be my last inside that kitchen as a free woman. Daniel arrived unannounced, bursting through the front door like the house already belonged to him. "Mom," he said, "we have to go right now." I looked up startled. "Go where?" "I scheduled you a medical evaluation," he said. "Just routine, nothing big." My chest tightened. "Why?" Lauren walked in behind him. "We noticed your memory's slipping, Eleanor. You forgot Daniel's birthday last month." "I didn't forget it," I snapped. "He wasn't even here on his birthday." Daniel didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge it. "Come on," he said, taking my arm firmly, too firmly. "It'll be fast." I resisted. "Daniel, I don't need any evaluation." He didn't let go. His grip tightened. It was the first time my son ever handled me like a problem instead of a parent. "Mom, stop making this hard," he said, voice low. "We're trying to help you." Help. Another soft word disguised as something gentle. I should have screamed. I should have run. But I trusted him. Even through the fear, even through the stiffness in his eyes, I wanted to believe he loved me. I let them take me. They didn't take me to a clinic. They took me to Rosewood Senior Living. A nursing home. I remember the sterile smell, the fluorescent lights, the fake smiles of staff. My heart hammered in my chest. "Daniel," I whispered, "what are we doing here?" Before he could speak, Lauren handed a clipboard to the receptionist. "She's checking in." I froze. Checking in for what? Lauren plastered on the sweetest smile I'd ever seen her fake. For her new home. The room spun. My pulse roared in my ears. "Daniel," I pleaded. "No, I'm fine. I don't need to live here." He rubbed his forehead. "Mom, you need supervision. You almost left the stove on last week." That was one time, and the tea kettle whistled. I turned it off. Lauren rolled her eyes. "She's confused again." I snapped. "I'm not confused." But Daniel didn't look at me the way a son looks at his mother. He looked at me like a burden. "Mom, the decision has been made," he said coldly. And then they walked out. Just like that. Left me in a room with beige walls, a bed too stiff for comfort, and a window that didn't open fully. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing. My hands shook, my throat burned. My son, my only child, had abandoned me there. But the cruelty didn't end that day. It was only the opening scene. The next morning, one of the nurses, kind eyes, soft voice, brought me breakfast and gently said, "Your son dropped off paperwork last night. He said he'll handle your house from now on." Handle. Another soft word, the sharp knife underneath. I knew then what I should have known months ago. They didn't bring me here to help me. They brought me here to get me out of the way. At noon, another nurse pulled me aside. "Do you know your son transferred property documents yesterday?" My breath left my lungs. Property documents. My house. The house I built. The house that held my memories, my marriage, my motherhood. Gone. Or so they thought. Because betrayal has a strange power. It awakens parts of you that you thought had died long ago. As I sat on that stiff mattress, staring at the locked door, something inside me hardened. My tears dried. My hands steadied. My breathing slowed until the anger inside me became sharp, focused. If my son thought age had weakened me, he was about to learn that 78 years teach you more about survival than he ever knew. I wasn't going to die in that place. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let the son I raised walk away after throwing me into a cage. Not without facing the consequences. Not without seeing what a mother can do when she's been wronged. Not without realizing he didn't put me in a nursing home. He put me into a position where I had nothing left to lose. And that is the most dangerous place to leave an old woman. But what Daniel and Lauren didn't know I had a secret waiting for them back at my house. The first night in Rosewood Senior Living, I lay on that stiff mattress staring at the ceiling tiles. I counted every fluorescent line in the grid, imagining them cracking under the weight of my anger. I could hear the soft shuffle of other residents, the faint hum of an air conditioner that never worked quite right, and the distant echo of laughter that didn't belong to me. My home had been taken, my life interrupted, my son had betrayed me, and yet I was alive. That was something they couldn't touch. Not yet. I spent hours thinking about the house. Every corner of it haunted me. The kitchen where I had baked Daniel's favorite chocolate chip cookies. The living room where we had celebrated Christmas after Christmas. The porch where Richard had built a swing for me, where Daniel had learned to ride his bike. My heart ached, but my mind sharpened. I needed a plan, and at 78, patience was my weapon. The following morning, I learned that Lauren and Daniel had begun moving things from my house immediately. I hadn't even been gone 24 hours. They hired movers under the guise of repairs, cataloging my furniture, my silverware, my grandmother's heirlooms, even the photographs of Daniel as a child. Every photo they packed was a thumbprint on the betrayal, a reminder that they considered my life a commodity. I knew I couldn't stop them physically. No one would let me back into my home, but I could still act. I had spent decades managing bills, deeds, and legal documents. My memory wasn't perfect, but it was sharper than anyone expected. I remembered a detail buried in a filing cabinet in the study. The original deed to the house, signed by Richard and me, hidden in a drawer no one had ever touched for decades. Next morning, while breakfast was served, I whispered to a young nurse named Carla. "Carla, can you get me a small notebook and pen? I need to write down some addresses and numbers." She looked at me with concern, but she was kind and agreed. I wrote a list of people I could call if I needed help. Lawyers, former neighbors, friends who still remembered Richard and me, even old contractors who knew the house better than anyone. I folded it neatly and hid it in my nightstand. Step 1. Allies. Meanwhile, Daniel and Lauren were busy dismantling my life. Every day, packages arrived, deliveries left, movers in and out. I watched from my window when they thought I wasn't looking, cataloging everything in my mind. Who was moving what? What boxes contained documents? Which boxes held sentimental items? Everything mattered because one misstep on their part was all I needed. By the third day, I noticed Lauren had made a critical error. She had left a small stack of envelopes near the study door in the open, thinking no one in the nursing home would know. I remembered instantly. One of those envelopes contained a copy of a signed power of attorney, but not the one they were using. A document that, if revealed, could challenge all of their claims. My mind raced. I began formulating a plan. I would need patience, guile, and timing. I could not afford to confront them outright. They would call the police, claim I was delusional or worse. No, this had to be subtle, almost invisible until the moment of revelation. Over the next week, I gained allies quietly. Carla and another nurse, an older woman named Helen, were my confidants. They were observant and empathetic, recognizing the subtle cruelty of Daniel and Lauren. Helen helped me gain access to a small computer in the library. Restricted, yes, but manageable with patience. I began documenting everything. Each phone call, each delivery, every suspicious action. A record, a web of proof that would one day trap them. One evening, as the shadows of dusk crept across the walls, I recalled a story Richard had once told me. "Ellie, even the smallest fox can outwit the hounds if she knows the forest." That night, I became the fox. I moved quietly, plotted, remembered everything I had ever learned about people's weaknesses. Daniel's ego, Lauren's impatience, their greed, their arrogance. They had all been my teachers without my knowing. The days blended together. I pretended to sleep while listening to the staff chatter, pretending to be fragile while noticing everything. I learned which boxes they packed first, where they stored the documents, even which nights they left the doors slightly ajar for convenience. And then it happened, a misstep that changed everything. Lauren, in her haste to clear the study, had left a key document in plain sight, the original deed's copy that could legally nullify her and Daniel's claim. My heart skipped a beat. This was the first tangible advantage I had. I memorized every word on the page. I took a photograph discreetly with my phone. One misstep by them and the scales of justice could tilt in my favor. The tension built each day. My son visited less frequently, often only when Lauren demanded it. He would speak to me politely, but there was a coldness in his eyes. The warmth that I had known when he was a boy, bringing me flowers, helping with chores, hugging me during storms, was gone. I realized something brutally honest. The boy I raised had been buried under greed and manipulation. But I also knew that my age was my camouflage. They didn't see the steel behind the trembling hands, the mind still sharp as a razor's edge. They underestimated me because they assumed fear had tamed me. They had no idea. One afternoon, I received a call from an old friend, Margaret, who had once been my neighbor. She mentioned casually that she had seen movers at my house and wondered why I hadn't been around. I feigned weakness, even confusion, and whispered, "Oh, Margaret, you wouldn't believe it, my son," and trailed off. Her curiosity was piqued. She promised to call her attorney cousin. A chain reaction was forming. Every night I imagined confronting them, not with anger, but with evidence so undeniable that their greed would unravel publicly. I envisioned the courtroom, their faces pale with shock as the judge read the documents I had secured. I envisioned Daniel pleading, Lauren trembling, and me standing calm, collected, and victorious. My house, my memories, my dignity, reclaimed. Then came the moment that I had been waiting for. Daniel had made a routine mistake. He left his personal laptop on the counter in the study during a visit, connected to the house Wi-Fi and synced with emails and documents. Through my network of allies and old friends with legal knowledge, I gained access to this digital trail. Each message, each plan, each lie was a thread I could pull. A tapestry of betrayal exposed for all to see. I started sending anonymous tips to the movers, the attorneys, even local real estate agents. Subtle, indirect, but each one a calculated nudge in the right direction. Every error they made was an opportunity. They were blind to the fact that the woman they had imprisoned was now orchestrating her liberation from within the walls of Rosewood Senior Living. The weeks passed. I grew stronger, not physically but in resolve. I had survived decades of subtle cruelties, husband's occasional coldness, neighbors' judgments, the pangs of poverty in my youth. I had endured. I had studied human nature. I had sharpened my mind as others sharpen knives. And now my son and his wife had given me the one thing they thought I had lost forever. Time to plan, observe, and strike. I knew confrontation was coming, but I had to wait for the perfect moment. They had underestimated me at every turn. They had assumed that age equals weakness, that familiarity with family equals complacency, that love and trust could be weaponized without consequence. They were wrong, dead wrong. Every night I lay in that sterile bed, I whispered to myself, "You thought you could erase me, but I am still here. I am still Alina Grace Whitford, and you will not take what is mine. Not my home, not my dignity, not my life." And so the stage was set. The pieces were in motion. Daniel and Lauren believed the game was theirs, that I had been removed from it entirely. But the fox waits. The fox observes. And when the right moment comes, the fox strikes. Little did they know. The next move I made would turn their own greed into the trap that would undo them. The days at Rosewood blurred into weeks, but I didn't waste a single moment. I observed, I recorded, I plotted. Every move my son Daniel and his wife Lauren made from the comfort of my home was catalogued in my mind. Every delivery, every phone call, every whispered conversation, they were unraveling their own web without realizing it. The house that was supposed to be lost to me was still mine in spirit. Still mine in opportunity, and I had time on my side. I began with subtle actions, little nudges disguised as forgetfulness. I asked for my legal paperwork again and again, ostensibly to check my finances, while planting doubts among the staff about Daniel and Lauren's competence. A slip here, a question there, a vague comment about the original documents, or my husband's intentions. These tiny seeds would later grow into storms. Daniel visited infrequently, always rushed, always polite, always calculated. But I had learned his rhythm. He had not visited that day when Lauren decided to personally oversee the movers. That was my chance. I arranged a small plan. Using the information I had gleaned from the misplaced envelopes, the digital trail, and my network of old friends and legal contacts, I began to coordinate what would appear to them as nothing more than a frail old woman's confusion. I started with the local historical society. contacting an old attorney who had once advised Richard and me on property matters. I provided him with scanned copies of documents, photographs, and a detailed account of the events. By the time Daniel and Lauren realized I was mobilizing, it would be too late to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, I kept my days at Rosewood innocuous. I smiled at the staff, napped when convenient, whispered prayers at night. But I also learned the routines of the nursing home. Every unlocked door, every unattended hallway, every shift change became a mental map of opportunity. I was patient, because patience was now my sharpest weapon. I knew the moment for action would come, and when it did, it had to be perfect. Then came the call that changed everything. Carla, the young nurse I had been confiding in, whispered to me one afternoon, "Ma'am, I saw Lauren leaving your home documents on the counter again. She didn't lock them up." My pulse quickened. Finally, the threads I had been tracking for weeks were converging. I memorized the document's exact location. In the study, under the stack of contracts she had carelessly stacked while moving my antique silverware. The original deed, the legal heart of my home, was exposed. My hands trembled, but not from fear. They shook with anticipation. That night, as the residents slept and the hallways quieted, I began contacting the allies I had recruited. Margaret, my old neighbor, promised to consult her attorney cousin and notify local officials if anything untoward happened. The Historical Society was ready to verify the authenticity of the deed. Every domino was set, every piece in place. Yet I needed one more thing. Proof of Daniel and Lauren's intent. Proof that they had knowingly tried to erase me from my own life. This required subtlety. I began planting questions during my rare supervised calls with Daniel. "I wonder," I said, "how things will look if the deeds are misplaced." My voice trembled with feigned confusion, but he froze. Every pause, every hesitation was recorded mentally. I felt the first surge of hope I had experienced since being locked in that room. For the first time in weeks, I believed that justice could arrive, not just as fantasy, but as an inevitable consequence of their greed. Then came the night that I finally put the first part of the plan into motion. A storm had arrived, the wind lashing against the nursing home windows, as if nature itself was conspiring with me. I requested a private room in the library for a writing session, something the staff permitted because they had come to believe I was slowing down in my old age. There, with the documents I had secretly accessed, I began writing letters, compiling records, and photographing the evidence in minute detail. Every email, every photo, every note Daniel and Lauren had carelessly left behind was now part of my arsenal. But the real brilliance of the plan required patience and misdirection. I had to make them believe I was fragile, weak, incapable of action. Each day I feigned forgetfulness, each call to legal contacts masked as confusion. They watched from a distance, smug in their assumption that their victory was complete. Then, one evening, the most pivotal event occurred. Daniel had returned to the house to check on the movers and left his laptop open in the living room. Connected to the home Wi-Fi, all emails, messages, and photos were accessible. Using my contacts, I gained a secure connection and downloaded the evidence. Every plan they had made to seize my home, every lie they had told about my competence, every instance of manipulation recorded, archived, undeniable. With this, the trap was nearly complete. I had patience, evidence, and legal leverage. The pieces were aligned for the perfect moment. I could almost see their faces, pale with shock, when the authorities confirmed their deception. Every smug smile, every dismissive comment about my age and weakness would be undone. During this time, I also learned something that steeled my resolve further. One of the movers, a young man named Greg, confided in Carla that Lauren had been bragging about how easily she would inherit the house, mocking the idea that I could stop them. This arrogance, this contempt for the woman who had raised their husband, fueled me. It confirmed that the trap I had been building could not fail. My nights were spent strategizing, reviewing every detail, ensuring nothing was left to chance. The storm outside mirrored the fury within me, the culmination of decades of endurance, betrayal, and quiet suffering. Every hardship, every moment of quiet pain, had been preparing me for this confrontation. And yet I remained calm. The nursing home staff were unaware of the mental chess game unfolding. They saw only a tired, elderly woman, supposedly confused, yet polite. This facade was critical. My strength lay in my invisibility. Daniel and Lauren would never suspect the cunning behind the tremor in my hands or the pause in my speech. Then came the message from Margaret. Her attorney cousin had reviewed the scanned documents and confirmed their validity. The deed was mine, unequivocally. The legal authority was mine. Now all that remained was the confrontation, carefully orchestrated, public, undeniable. The plan was simple in theory, but intricate in execution. I would return to my home under legal supervision, expose their manipulation, present the evidence of deceit, and reclaim the house that was stolen from me. It was a delicate balance of timing, evidence, and patience. Each day brought me closer to the moment of reckoning. I practiced the words I would say, imagined the shock on their faces, rehearsed my composure. This was no longer merely a fight for property. It was a fight for dignity, for justice, for recognition that a life built with love and labor cannot be erased by greed. I even envisioned the aftermath. Daniel's guilt, Lauren's fury, the court proceedings, neighbors whispering their surprise, the media coverage if it came to that. The story of betrayal, cunning, and survival. A 78-year-old woman outsmarting those who underestimated her would become legend. And then one afternoon, as I sat quietly in my library room, I realized something. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It wasn't the confrontation. It was the quiet wait, the patience, the observation, the careful orchestration of every tiny move to ensure victory without giving them a chance to retaliate. By the end of that week, everything was in motion. The authorities, the legal allies, the photographic evidence, the copies of emails, the original deed. It all converged in a single unstoppable force. My son and his wife had unknowingly laid the foundation for their own exposure. They had underestimated the fox who had lived through decades of subtle cruelties and survived. I leaned back in my chair, a faint smile on my lips. The storm outside had passed, but inside me a storm had begun. A storm of justice, of retribution, of reclamation. The stage was set. The pieces were moving. And soon, Daniel and Lauren would discover that a mother's love may be exploited, but her cunning, once awakened, is a force no one can contain. The moment came sooner than they expected, and when I stepped back into my house, their world began to unravel. The morning I returned to my house, it felt surreal. The familiar white siding, the creak of the front gate, the smell of damp earth and pine, the things I had missed more than I could describe, welcomed me like a ghost. But this was no casual return. I was not Alina Whitford, the frail old woman who had been manipulated into Rosewood. No, I was Alina Grace Whitford, survivor, strategist, and orchestrator of a reckoning that Daniel and Lauren would never forget. I stepped through the threshold with quiet authority, observing every corner. The movers were gone, leaving traces of Lauren's haste. Crooked picture frames, boxes left half-packed, furniture slightly displaced. Each imperfection a breadcrumb that testified to their carelessness, their arrogance, their belief that I was powerless. But I was no longer powerless. I was armed with evidence, allies, and the law. The first person I confronted was the house itself. I walked from room to room, touching the counters, the hardwood floors, the staircase railing Richard had polished decades ago. Memories of laughter, arguments, birthdays, and tears washed over me. But instead of breaking me, they steeled me. Every step I took was a reclamation, a physical affirmation that no betrayal could erase a lifetime of love, labor, and endurance. Then I began the delicate task of documentation verification. Margaret's attorney cousin had arranged for an official review of the deed, contracts, and correspondence I had collected. Within hours, confirmations arrived. The property legally belonged to me. Any attempts Daniel or Lauren made to contest it would be immediately dismissed. The legal foundation of their plans had been built on lies, arrogance, and ignorance. I smiled quietly. The trap was closing. Next came the evidence of their manipulations. The emails, the messages, the records of phone calls. Each one painted a picture of greed so blatant it could not be ignored. Daniel had not only neglected his mother, but had actively conspired with his wife to seize what was not theirs. The documents were meticulously organized, a record of their moral and legal failures. It was tempting to confront them immediately, to relish the shock on their faces, but patience was critical. This confrontation had to be public, undeniable, and strategically perfect. Every moment of exposure had to humiliate them, leaving no room for denial or escape. I contacted a trusted local attorney, explaining the situation, sharing the evidence, and requesting assistance in ensuring Daniel and Lauren could not interfere or manipulate the outcome. Within a day, legal representatives arrived at my house, confirming the documents, authenticity, and preparing the formal notice to reclaim property rights. I was ready. Daniel and Lauren arrived separately, each expecting ease and compliance. Daniel, still smug in his assumed control, looked around, frowning at the slightly disheveled state of the house. "Mom, what?" he began, his voice trailing off. Lauren, ever confident, waved her hand dismissively. "We're just here to make sure everything is in order. You should be grateful we handled it so quickly." I let them speak, listening carefully. Every word, every pause, every glance was another confirmation of their underestimation. Their confidence was their undoing. Then I spoke. My voice was calm, deliberate, controlled. "You have handled nothing. You have taken what is not yours and assumed I am powerless. You have underestimated me, and now you will see the consequences." Daniel's face paled. Lauren's smile faltered. I could see the first seeds of panic take root. I presented the documents. One by one, I revealed the original deed, the emails, the correspondence showing intent, the photographic evidence of their carelessness. Their reactions were almost predictable, yet still satisfying. Daniel's jaw tightened, Lauren's fingers trembled, both realizing the legal and moral trap they had walked into. "You see," I continued, "everything you thought was under your control was an illusion. You assumed age would weaken me, that compliance would be easy. You assumed greed would mask the truth. But greed is a poor ally when faced with strategy, evidence, and truth." The legal representatives confirmed, in no uncertain terms, that all property rights, including deeds and documents, belonged to me. Any claims by Daniel or Lauren would be dismissed. I watched as their faces drained of color, their carefully constructed arrogance crumbling. Then I revealed the final piece. The emails and messages from movers and contractors that explicitly showed Lauren's plan to secure the house for herself, using Daniel as her instrument. The room seemed to shrink around them, their bravado replaced by disbelief and shame. "I trusted you," I said, my voice steady but charged with emotion. "I raised you, Daniel, believing that blood mattered more than wealth, but you allowed greed to guide you, and now you must face the consequences." Lauren's hands shook. "Mom Alina, you can't, this isn't." I interrupted. "It already is. The law recognizes truth, not deception, and the truth is that you attempted to steal from me." For the first time, Daniel attempted an excuse. "Mom, I thought." "You thought," I repeated, my eyes cold. "You thought I would not notice. You thought that because I am older, I am weak. I am older, yes, but I am neither weak nor blind. And you, my son, forgot one critical lesson. Never underestimate the fox in the forest." By the time they realized the depth of their defeat, it was complete. I had reclaimed the house, restored the documents, and exposed the full extent of their betrayal. Yet the most satisfying part was not legal victory. It was moral. They had assumed they could erase me, dismiss me, and manipulate me without consequence. They had been wrong. I took a slow walk through the house, each room a reminder of endurance, a testament to survival. Daniel and Lauren retreated, defeated, humiliated, aware that the next steps would be dictated entirely by me. They could no longer manipulate, threaten, or bully. The house was mine, the victory absolute, and the lesson unmistakable. Betrayal may wound, but cunning and patience can heal and strike back with force. I spent that night alone in the house, the silence a balm after weeks of tension, plotting, and subtle warfare. I reflected on the betrayal, the planning, and the execution. I realized that survival had always been within me, waiting for the moment to awaken. And as I gazed at the walls I had built, touched the counters I had polished, and walked the floors that carried the echoes of my family's laughter, I understood this simple truth. No one, not even your own child, can take from you what you know to be yours, if you refuse to surrender it. But reclaiming the house was only the beginning, because Daniel and Lauren weren't finished, and the next move would test not just my cunning, but my very will to survive. The morning after reclaiming my house, I woke with a quiet sense of triumph, but also unease. Victory had its own danger. Daniel and Lauren had lost the battle, yes, but they were far from defeated. Anger breeds recklessness, and I knew that the next move would come like a storm. They had underestimated me once. They would not make the same mistake again. I began the day by inspecting the house. Every window, every door, every lock received my attention. I checked the security system, reprogrammed alarms, and ensured that any access they thought they might exploit in their fury was blocked. The house was mine, but the war was not over. Then the phone rang. Daniel. His voice was strained, tight, unfamiliar. "Mom, Alina, we need to talk. Can we come over?" I listened quietly, sensing every hidden motive. This was not an apology. This was a trap, or at least an attempt to test my composure. "Come," I said slowly, deliberately. "But know this, I am prepared for anything." Within the hour, they arrived. Daniel's face was pale, his arrogance tempered by desperation. Lauren's confidence was gone, replaced with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. They stepped through the door as if entering enemy territory, and in many ways they were. I led them into the living room, my calm a weapon sharper than any words they could muster. "Sit," I said. "Let's talk." Daniel tried to regain control. "Mom, we just want to discuss things like adults." I smiled thinly. Adults, yes, and adults take responsibility for their actions. Lauren interrupted, voice trembling. "Alina, we didn't mean." "Stop," I said, raising a hand. "Your intentions are irrelevant. Only actions matter, and your actions have consequences." I revealed the digital evidence first. Emails, texts, photos, all documenting their plan to seize my home. I watched their faces pale as the documents scrolled across the tablet I had prepared. Daniel stumbled over his words, Lauren's hands shook, and for the first time, they realized the scale of their miscalculation. "Every move you made," I continued, "was recorded, documented, and verified. Every attempt to manipulate, every deceitful conversation, every plan to erase me from my life, exposed." They sat in silence, the weight of realization pressing down. I allowed the pause to stretch, savoring the exact moment their arrogance crumbled. Then I revealed the final evidence. The original deed, verified by the attorney, legally binding and indisputable. "This," I said, holding the document firmly, "is the house and it always was mine. Your greed blinded you. Your contempt underestimated me. And now you face the consequences." Lauren's face turned red. "This isn't fair, you can't." I interrupted, voice steady and cold. "Fairness is irrelevant. Justice is. And justice doesn't require your consent." Daniel swallowed hard, struggling for a response, but words failed him. He had expected to intimidate, to coerce, to manipulate, and instead faced an implacable force. I, the woman he had once ignored, underestimated, and imprisoned, now commanded the room with authority and power. Over the next hour, I outlined the steps they would take to rectify the chaos they had caused, returning personal items to my possession, reimbursing damages for careless movers, and publicly acknowledging the deception they had executed. Every instruction was deliberate, every word precise. Yet the most satisfying moment was not legal or material. It was moral. Their faces reflected humiliation, defeat, and the shocking realization that their mother, the woman they had dismissed, was a force they could not bend. By nightfall, Daniel and Lauren had left, muttering apologies that were meaningless but necessary. I locked the doors, checked every window, and allowed myself a moment of private triumph. The house was safe, my legacy preserved, and justice, sweet and uncompromising, had been served. But peace, I knew, would be temporary. Betrayal leaves scars, and the scars of Daniel and Lauren ran deep. I could sense their simmering resentment, their determination to strike back in ways they had not yet conceived. This was not the end. It was a chapter, a pivotal moment in a continuing story of survival and cunning. That night, I reflected on the path that had led me here. Years of subtle betrayals, decades of endurance, and the courage to act when all seemed lost. I realized that true strength does not come from youth, wealth, or physical power. It comes from patience, intelligence, and the unwavering refusal to surrender what is rightfully yours. As I prepared for bed, I placed the final copies of documents in a safe, secure location, ensuring that any attempt to challenge me would be futile. My home, my dignity, my legacy, all protected by strategy and foresight. And yet, deep in my heart, I knew the story was not over. Betrayal does not end with a single defeat. It festers, waits, and sometimes strikes when you least expect it. But I was ready. I had survived worse. I had endured, planned, and executed with precision. And now, any future threat would meet a woman who had mastered patience, cunning, and resilience. In the silence of the night, I whispered to myself, "You thought you could erase me. You thought age would make me fragile. You were wrong, always wrong." The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, I sensed the first tremors of Daniel and Lauren's retaliation. Small, tentative, unsure, but unmistakable. Their greed and desperation were no longer hidden. They were exposed, visible to anyone who knew how to see. I smiled. Let them try. They had underestimated me once. They would not underestimate me again. I was a leaner Grace Whitford, survivor, strategist, mother, and no betrayal, no matter how cruel, could ever take that from me. But their retaliation was coming faster than I expected, and this time it would test everything I had learned about survival, cunning, and cruelty. The morning after their failed attempt to reclaim control, Daniel and Lauren were not just defeated, they were furious. I could feel it in the letters, the calls, the subtle movements of their allies who had started probing for weaknesses. But I had anticipated this. Every step they took was another thread I could manipulate, another mistake waiting to be turned against them. I spent the day reinforcing my defenses. Every lock, every security camera, every legal safeguard I had prepared in the previous weeks now became a fortress. But physical protection was not enough. This battle required cunning, psychological precision, and patience that only a lifetime of suffering could teach. That evening, Daniel called. His voice was sharp, strained, barely controlled. "Mom, Alina, we need to settle this before it escalates." I let him speak, careful to note every tone, every hesitation, every slip. "Settle?" I asked calmly. "You have been settling all along, and now the terms are mine." Lauren called next, her voice brittle with tension. "This isn't fair, you're destroying us." I laughed softly, a low, satisfied sound. Fairness is irrelevant. Survival is everything. And survival, as you will soon see, favors those who endure, who plan, and who refuse to surrender. I spent the night reviewing my evidence one last time. Emails, texts, receipts, witness statements, legal documentation. They were flawless. Every attempt they had made to steal my house, to manipulate me, to erase me, was recorded, verified, and undeniable. I had not only survived, they had exposed themselves completely. The next day, I orchestrated the final confrontation. With legal representatives, witnesses, and a few key allies in place, Daniel and Lauren arrived at my home, expecting intimidation to work. But I greeted them with quiet authority. Every detail, the lighting, the arrangement of the room, the presence of the witnesses, was calculated to maximize impact. I presented the evidence one piece at a time. Emails showing intent, text messages exposing deceit, documents proving ownership. Each revelation chipped away at their confidence, leaving only raw panic. I watched Lauren's forced composure crumble, Daniel's arrogance vanish, replaced by stunned disbelief. "This is your last chance," I said calmly, though my voice carried the weight of decades of betrayal. "You can admit your mistakes and step away, or continue this path and face consequences you cannot imagine." Lauren stammered, but the words stuck in her throat. Daniel tried to argue, to rationalize, but each statement was met with undeniable evidence of their wrongdoing. Their allies tried to intervene, but even they realized the inevitability of the outcome. By mid-afternoon, the legal representatives confirmed that every claim Daniel and Lauren had made was invalid. The house was legally, irrevocably mine. Any attempt to interfere further would result in immediate legal action. My victory was complete. But I didn't stop there. The final act required not just legal vindication, but moral justice. I revealed to them the evidence of their personal manipulations, the conversations with movers, the lies to neighbors, the false claims to contractors. The humiliation was public, witnessed by allies who could testify if necessary. They were exposed, not just as greedy manipulators, but as betrayers of blood. Daniel's face was pale. Lauren's hands shook. The power they had assumed for themselves dissolved in the room like smoke, and I, Eleanor Grace Whitford, stood at the center, unshaken, undeniable, triumphant. After they left, defeated, humiliated, and finally aware that their mother, the woman they had tried to erase, was unstoppable, I walked through my home. Each room carried the echoes of my life, laughter, tears, memories. The house was mine, the legacy preserved, the betrayal avenged. And as I sat in the study, watching the sunlight fall across the floors polished decades ago, I realized a truth I had learned slowly over a lifetime. Betrayal wounds. It cuts deep. It leaves scars. But survival, cunning, and patience can turn those wounds into power. I had endured cruelty, abandonment, and greed. I had been underestimated, ignored, and betrayed by my own blood. But I had survived. And in survival, I had reclaimed everything they tried to take from me. My home, my dignity, my legacy. The house was quiet once more, safe, secure, mine. And for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to breathe freely, knowing that no one, not son, not daughter-in-law, not the world, could ever take this life, this house, this victory from me again. I had faced betrayal and cruelty, endured it all, and turned it into triumph. I had survived. I had outwitted those who thought me weak. And I had ensured that anyone who tried to cross me again would learn a lesson written in a language they could never forget. A mother's cunning, when awakened, is more dangerous than any weapon. The story ends here. The house stands, the betrayal exposed, the victory complete, and the woman who endured all, Eleanor Grace Whitford, remains unbroken.